Plenty of social media reaction from Africa following the news of Aretha Franklin's death. Tuli Shabalala takes us through some of them.
The world has taken to social media to pay tribute to Aretha Franklin. Renowned African musician Angelique Kidjo has expressed her gratitude to Franklin for opening the path for singers. A somber moment for former U.S. First Lady Michelle Obama, who recalls the times she watched the Queen of Soul perform. In Kenya, this musician remembers the moment she shared the stage with the music legend. In South Africa, a musician calls to mind Franklin's prolific voice. A big tree has fallen, an inspiration to many talented acts of our generation. Rest in power, the Queen of Soul. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Meanwhile, India is mourning former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who died on Thursday at the age of 93. Vajpayee was a founding member of the Congress Party that governed India for decades. He died from age-related illnesses. A bachelor all his life, Vajpayee is survived by an adopted daughter. The three-time Prime Minister is best known for making India a nuclear weapons power by ordering nuclear tests in 1998. He's also remembered for taking a bus to Pakistan in a diplomatic gesture to mend ties between the fractious neighbours. Vajpayee studied politics but became a journalist and a social worker while campaigning to end British rule in India. He was elected to Parliament in 1957 at the age of 33. In 1979, he made an historic visit to China as Minister of External Affairs. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Vajpayee in hospital on Wednesday. He's tweeted that the former leader's death is a personal and irreplaceable loss.
थल सेना अध्यक्ष श्री बिपिन रावत श्रद्धा सुमन अर्पित करते हुए.
Well, let's now return to the death of Aretha Franklin. We'll get more on that. The Queen of Soul's influence in Africa. I'm joined in the studio by Bill Odidi. He's the head of the English service at the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. Thank you very much for joining us, Bill. So tell us more about her influence and the impact she's had on people in Africa.
Yeah, well, I can look at Aretha's life and her influence from a personal perspective, because I knew her in what was generally sort of the second stage of her career. So, I mean, I was just looking at my CD collection, and I brought one of the CDs that I had from Aretha Franklin in my collection, which I bought in the 90s. This I bought in the 90s. And it sort of captures the first phase of her career, which is now in the 60s. And that appeals to an earlier generation, right on to the 80s and 90s when some of us were catching up with her. And discovering just the impact that she had, because she came on to the scene probably in the 60s, and a lot of the African countries were just coming out of independence, coming from a time when we had been listening to a lot of pop and rock on our radio stations. And then there's this black artist who were emerging on the scene from the Motown era. She was from Detroit, but she was not part of the Motown era. But we sort of classified her with James Brown and all these great artists, Marvin Gaye and the Jacksons and all the rest of that. And it was a new reawakening, because we didn't just listen to that music in this part of the world, in Africa, but it sort of spawned a whole generation of African artists who said, hey, we can do this. So in addition to playing music by African-American artists, there was a whole generation of, the first generation really, of Kenyan and African artists who emerged aping some of the styles from the African-Americans, but also fusing it with their own styles. And they turned out to be really, really successful, because we saw a little bit of ourselves in people like Aretha Franklin. So her impact, her influence is enormous.
let's talk about her influence in other ways. She was a strong believer in the power of representation and an example for young girls and women in Africa. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that entirely, because when you see her career, and I'm happy that a lot of young people, because the population of countries like Kenya and much of Africa is very, very young. So a lot of people are now asking themselves the question, who is this Aretha Franklin? And reading about this fascinating story of a girl who became a global superstar in extremely difficult conditions, in the middle of segregation in America, and discovering that a lot of the challenges that Aretha Franklin and much of that generation went through is nothing compared to what young girls and young women in Africa might be facing at the moment. So it's such a motivation, it's such an inspiration that, hey, they overcame such great odds that we really have no reason not to meet our full potential today.
But all that she went through obviously contributed to the power of her music, her voice.
Yeah, absolutely. She channeled so much of her emotion and so much of her experiences in some of the songs that she performed.
Returning to the continent, how would you say she's influenced and inspired musicians here?
Well, number one, I made that point about some of the earlier generation, the generation of musicians who emerged just after independence. But today you can see in Aretha, the influence of Aretha Franklin in, I would describe people like Angelique Kidjo from Benin, who really stamped their authority around Africa and on the global stage. Fatoumata Diawara from Mali, and that kind of, really powerful personalities who are not just great talents, but are using their talents as well to channel some of the struggles that people in Africa might be going through, and who provide such an inspiration to so many Africans. So we see a lot of motivation and such a spirit in the life that Aretha Franklin led, and the fact that she remained relevant to this day is so incredible, and such an amazing story for many Africans. It's a wonderful story.
Continue, no doubt. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you very much. We celebrate the life of Aretha Franklin.
Okay, thank you so much.